everyone. Welcome back to Psych the Podcast with your host, B&B.
I'm Brittany.
And I'm Brianna. So, this is going to be the second episode of the podcast. And right now, we're doing the Road to series. So, today's episode is Road to PhD tips, timeline, and trusted advisor. And again, since we are a new podcast, just wanted to touch back on why we're here. We're here to create content for diverse students interested in earning their PhD in psychology.
And as you can see here today, we have special guest, Dr. Jashawn Mance. Dr. Jashawn Mance is an assistant professor of psychology, chair of graduate admissions in the psychology department, and licensed clinical psychologist. Her scholarly work focuses on culturally and contextually relevant school and community-based mental health interventions for adolescents and young adults exposed to trauma. Her clinical specialty areas include, but not limited to, adolescent mental health, complex trauma, race-related stress and trauma, and mood disorders. Dr. Mance's research has been published in the Journal of Community Psychology, Journal of Black Psychology, Progress in Community Health Partnerships, Psychological Assessment, and several additional journals and periodicals. She has partnered with communities both domestically and internationally, influencing mental health practices and research. Currently, Dr. Mance has partnered with several charter schools and community agencies in Washington, D.C. and Maryland on the Network Project, which examines chronic stress, trauma, coping, social support systems, and psychological symptoms amongst youth and young adults of color. Additionally, Dr. Mance's Youth and Communities Research Lab is investigating race-related stress, cultural coping, and psychological symptoms amongst Black emerging adults with the Emerging While Black study. Her work and contributions to the field have garnered attention beyond academia. She has contributed to the national dialogue on race and/or mental health as a guest on WHUR, NPR, The Washington Post, National Geographic, and Yahoo.com. In 2018, Dr. Mance was awarded one of Howard University's awards for Outstanding Assistant Professor, Division of Natural Sciences in the College of Arts and Science for the 2017-2018 academic year. Additionally, she was awarded the Irvin and Pamela Trotman Reed Faculty Award for Exemplary Research and Service. Dr. Mance holds a BS in Psychology from Bethune-Cookman University, MS in Community Psychology from Florida A&M University, and an MA and PhD in Clinical Psychology from DePaul University. She completed her predoctoral clinical internship at Duke University Medical Center and a postdoctoral fellowship as a W.K. Kellogg Community Health Scholar at Johns Hopkins University, Bloomberg School of Public Health. Wow. We are grateful to have you as a guest on our episode today. Thank you again for joining us and being willing to speak with us.
Thank you for the invitation. It's my pleasure to be here.
Yes, we are so happy to have you here today. And I'm sure you'll be getting into great tips and details to help out future psychology PhD students. So just to talk about an overview of what we are going to be discussing today, we're actually going to be providing tips that future PhD students should know, talk about creating a timeline that you should be following in regards to your application. And mostly we'll be getting into the details of mentorship relations and researching and connecting with a potential research advisor.
Yeah, so let's get into our first question that we have for you today, Dr. Mance, is what is something you wish you would have known while applying to your program?
That's a really great question. I wish I would have known that it is okay to reach out to potential mentors that feel comfortable in asking questions, feel comfortable in asking for their time, even before you interview, before you submit the application. So I wish I really would have known that it's okay to reach out. It's okay to ask questions. It's okay to kind of make contact prior to even submitting an application. And even before that, I want to back up and say how important having some experience in a research lab, how important and valuable that is. I wish I would have had more knowledge about that, because as you read from my bio, my bachelor's was from a small liberal arts institution, Bethune-Cookman University, and there wasn't a lot of research, if any, in the Department of Psychology at that university. So I transitioned to a master's level program so that I could get research experience prior to applying to a PhD program. But that was my path. Everyone doesn't necessarily have to follow that path, because if you're at a university that has active research labs, then I would strongly encourage students to volunteer in research labs.
Yeah.
Right. Thank you for that. And that is great information. I think Brittany and I can both agree to that. Now, since you said that was something you wish you would have known, can you talk a little bit more about what it actually looked like in your experience of when you sought out that program, and what you thought of potential advisors in that specific program? Did you email them? Did you go to an open house? Kind of, what did that look like?
That's a really great question. I'm going to date myself now because I was like, oh my gosh, so long ago. But the good thing is, because I am in graduate admissions, I can tell you what it looked like X amount of years ago and what it looks like now. I did reach out. I ended up attending DePaul University, working with Dr. Kathy Grant and Bernadette Sanchez. I started out with Kathy Grant, and I ended up with working with Bernadette Sanchez. Well, really both of them together, because Dr. Sanchez, Bernadette, she was an assistant professor at the time. She had been awarded tenure. So different universities have different policies. So because she wasn't tenured, she wasn't able to chair a dissertation. So she and Dr. Grant partnered together so that she could, Dr. Sanchez could be my graduate advisor with my dissertation. But Dr. Grant was the person who brought me into the program, because most PhD programs are, and it's important for me to say this for your podcast, most PhD programs are mentorship programs. Right. So you enter under the wings, if you will, of the professor of choice that you selected, or who selected you to work with them. So Dr. Grant brought me into the program. I worked with her throughout my, I said for probably the first 3 years of my program. And then when it was time for me to do my dissertation research, I partnered with Dr. Bernadette Sanchez. Did I answer your question? Okay. The process. I was like, wait a minute, what was the question? So I actually reached out to her via email, asked for a telephone call, and she was so nice. She was really, really kind. And she suggested that I speak with students in her lab, which was really helpful. And just hearing their experience, it really just, for me, sold the program for me. So the program sold itself on the paper, but really hearing the student's perspective and then actually speaking with Dr. Grant, I was like, oh, I really want to get into this program. A lot of the other programs, I would reach out to professors. They wouldn't always respond, but I didn't take it personal because I figured that they were really busy. But then there's some people who I was a bit intimidated by, so I didn't bother to reach out to them. And that's kind of going back to that suggestion of like, don't be intimidated. They're, the professors are human too. They're looking for strong students. So I wish I would have just reached out to more people. But yeah, my process was essentially reading up on different programs, because I knew, I may be a little bit different. I knew from the age of 12 that I wanted to get a PhD in psychology. So my experience may have been a little bit different, where some people just kind of figured it out in college. I knew, like, when I went into my undergrad program, that the ultimate goal was going to be a PhD in psychology. And not a lot of undergraduates enter the doors of their undergraduate institution knowing that. Some people don't figure it out until their senior year.
Exactly.
Yeah, and if you do figure out your senior year, that's still okay, because there's different paths to this degree. right? There's different paths for the PhD.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's an interesting point that you say that, because I know personally I can relate to that as well. I went into undergrad, I think in high school, I knew that I wanted to ultimately get my PhD in psychology. So even when it came to looking at undergraduate schools, I started looking at 4+1 programs and how can I, get the maximum level of education on a certain trajectory and whatnot. It worked out to that I went straight forward from my undergraduate at Temple University to coming to Howard. But ever since I was a child, I think I knew I wanted to be, Dr. Brianna Johnson. Can you relate to that, Brittany? Like, how young did you know that that's what you wanted to do?
So I started out knowing that I wanted to be a therapist first. I knew that at 14. 14, I knew I wanted to be a therapist. And then going along with that process made me realize that I just wanted more flexibility in the field. So like I enjoy psychology so much that I know that, I want to be a professor. I want to do research. I still want to see clients, possibly want to review manuscripts. Like there's so much that you can do in psychology. And I'm like, I don't want to, limit myself by saying that I only want to be a clinician and having my master's degree. So I decided at that point to continue for a PhD.
Right. Definitely. Thank you for that, Brittany. All right, so moving right along into the next question, Dr. Mance, what was your timeline like when you applied to your program? So our audience members are a lot of people like currently in the stage, and it's that fall application time right now. So if you can kind of pinpoint, by September I have this, October this, or this is sort of what my timeline looked like to help out our audience members and people applying, what would you suggest? Or what was your experience in that?
So my experience was around the summer, because I ended up applying. So my story, I ended up applying to PhD programs, PhD and master's programs my senior year of my undergraduate, during my undergraduate time. I got accepted to all of the master's level programs, but not the doctoral level programs, which made sense because the type of university I went to, I didn't have a lot of experience, I didn't have any lab experience whatsoever. And some of the internships that I had, I could really show my experience, but you have to remember that the PhD is a research degree. Yes. And I think it's really important that your viewers know that the PhD is a research degree. And there is a PsyD, which is the Doctorate of Psychology, which is more of a practitioner, kind of applied type of degree. But the PhD is a research degree. And I knew I wanted the more research-oriented degree. So it makes sense that because I didn't have any research experience, no matter how strong my letters were, that I probably didn't get in. So I didn't get in. But I got a lot of good feedback. So people were like, oh, wow, like, you had really strong letters. It's, you're pretty clear about what you want.
Who did you get that feedback from?
I reached out to certain programs that I really, really wanted to get into. And maybe that person took the time to actually talk to me before I applied. I reached back out to them.
Okay.
Because I knew that person would be a little bit more responsive. There's some people that I didn't even bother because I was probably in just another number. And then there's some institutions, depending upon where you're applying. So like one institution, I think it was the University of Michigan, they have for all the people of color, specifically the Black graduate. So they have like this Black graduate student like union or something. I can't remember now. It's been a long time. Like, guys, it's been a long time. To age myself, to let you know, when we were talking about how did you know you want to be a psychologist, I was looking it up in an encyclopedia. So I'm aging myself so you'll know how old I am. So I reached out to a couple of those professors and they actually gave me feedback on like my statement and my my resume at the time, like to actually turn it into a CV, what the difference between a resume and a CV, folks took time to kind of give me feedback. And specifically, so for example, when I applied for University of Michigan, I'm not sure if they still have this, but going into the graduate school, applying to the graduate school, there were like this Black Graduate Student Union, like I think specifically in psychology, they would review those applications and let you know if you were missing anything.
Okay.
So they were they would help specifically Black students to make sure that their application was together. You had everything that you needed to have. And so I actually reached out to that program. It's like, hey, can somebody give me feedback? I didn't. And one kind person did. You know, everybody's busy. So you can find that one person. Sometimes you luck up and you find that one person, and I don't necessarily believe in luck. Sometimes the universe kind of put things in order for you so that you get what you need. And that's what I was able to get what I need. But that isn't always the case. It isn't always the case that you get feedback. Serving as the graduate admissions chair in the clinical psychology program at Howard, I often get emails with people asking for feedback on their applications. It all depends on what's going on in my academic year. If I'm like swamped, then no, I don't have the time to go and look at your specific application. But I may ask them a couple of questions, or may answer a couple of questions that I'm able to answer like off the top without having to dig and look for their application. If I have a little bit more time, and I'll let them know like, hey, you can follow up with me at the end of the academic year or over the summer, and I can give you more feedback. And there are some people who will circle back around, and I'll look at their application and I'll say, hey, you were missing this, or your interests are in this areas, and we don't have anybody in our program that focuses on this. So it's not just about getting in the program. It really is about a match or a fit between you and your mentor. And I'll give the people that feedback. Did I answer the question?
You did.
Okay.
Yes.
So I guess I'll follow up, and you touched on this a little bit, but what did you specifically look for in a program or advisor?
Okay. What did I specifically look for? I wanted someone who didn't mind doing more hands-on mentorship, because in some labs, they typically have their graduate students mentoring, like the more advanced graduate students who like in their third year, fourth year, fifth year, kind of mentoring the first year students. And then you may get some time with your advisor, maybe once every 3 weeks or so, or whenever you have a research meeting, but you're not getting individual time, it's just lab time, and you're kind of you're talking. But I wanted someone that had more like hands-on, and had more of a mentorship model that was not only just developing me as a researcher, but also as a clinician, and then also interested in making sure that I was connected through their networks. Because sometimes you have mentors that they just focus on mentoring you through your research, but not in other areas. And that was really important to me. So I was looking for that. And I want to go back for your other question, because I don't think I answered fully. Just want to go back very quickly when you're asking for a timeline.
Yeah.
I started during the summer, and there was a book, and I'm not sure, I think the APA still publishes this book about graduate programs in psychology. And so I spent the summer going through that book, looking at different programs, because it has descriptions of different programs, and programs that caught my eye, because I knew I wanted a clinical program, and I was interested in children. So I was looking for clinical child or just straight clinical programs. And I would mark the programs and then go in online and kind of look them up. I did that through the summer. So by the time late August, early September started, I already identified my programs and what I needed. And I had already started drafting my essays. So I spent the summer doing that and drafting essays. And I made sure that I had someone to read over my essays, probably the month of August and September. So by the time November came around, I was ready. Everything was ready. It was just a matter of maybe me mailing stuff off here or there. And I prioritized it based on the deadline. So there were some folks who had deadlines in December and some in early January. So then I prioritized the applications based on the deadline. And I made sure to give my recommenders, I made sure to give them at least 2 months in advance.
Okay.
Didn't wait to the
Yeah.
last minute. So that's why by November, I pretty much had everything except for some outstanding letters, because people are people, and professors have a lot to do. So if anything, I was just kind of waiting for my letters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for that, because I feel like, listeners, if it's anything to remember, that the professors who you are asking, or past bosses that you've had at jobs, they are people too, and they can't always bend immediately to when, say, if you just decided you want to apply to this program and you're giving them a week, that's not enough time.
No.
And we touched on it on the first episode a little bit about the people that you're reaching out for to write your recommendations. But please, when you're thinking of timelines, be conscientious of the dates that applications are due, dates your materials all need to be in, and also be wary that the people that you're asking have lives of their own, and just be respectful of that as well, in terms of when you need them to send in their materials to you so you could submit your package on time.
Exactly.
Well, I actually want to add, because I was actually the total opposite of you, Dr. Mance. I didn't decide to apply to PhD programs until October. Very late. Listeners, do not be like me. I mean, it worked out in my favor, but I was very late in deciding that, after discussing my options with professors. Is like, this is the year I graduate. I was in a master's program when I applied. So this is the year I graduate. I'm interested in seeing like what my career would look like. And ultimately I wasn't satisfied with what that could be. So I was like, so what are my options? Should I wait to go back to school, or should I go ahead and apply now and see what does come from that? Because I know at this point, I know that I want to go back. And I just went ahead with it. Thank goodness I had a great support team that was, willing to look over essays and everything for me last minute, because I just figured out last minute what was best for me. But that was so helpful, of course, having a great support system. So I just wanted to add that. I mean, Dr. Mance, you started in the summer, which is the best. This is what you should be doing.
That is great timing, ideal timing.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I started late, and I know that for some people that happens. Like it didn't click for me until I was in my master's program that, you know what, you need to go back. You want to go back to do what you want to do. So that was what my time looked like. It was very short, but I also had previous experience of applying to a graduate program because I applied to a master's program. So I think that definitely helped me as well, because I didn't take the GRE over. I just worked a lot with some of the previous materials that I had. So just wanted to add that.
Yeah.
There are two ends.
I mean, yeah, there are definitely so many different routes to this degree, right? So there's the person that may have started in the summer and early, and then there's the person who, like, okay, they made the decision in October, and even made the decision in November, and the deadline is in December. I mean, if that's one of your listeners, if you find that that's your listener, then my first suggestion would be reach out to your recommenders ASAP.
Yes.
Reach out to them ASAP. And a lot of institutions for this application cycle are waiving the GRE scores.
Yeah.
So Howard just made the decision maybe about 2 weeks ago, maybe about 2.5 weeks ago, to waive GRE requirements. So all that to say is, like, if you're like, oh, I haven't taken a GRE, if you're going at it, this application cycle is working for you, because most universities are waiving GRE requirement. So I would say go for your letters, and then while you're asking people for the letters, start working on your essays.
Yeah, well,
You still have time.
we are giving great tips here.
Yes. Please, listeners, take note. All right, so moving right along, we've been talking about what we look for in a program, timeline tips. So in terms of being an advisee, Dr. Mance, what would you say are some ways that an an advisee can be a good fit with their advisor in the program?
This is a great question, and I'm so glad you're asking that, because I get a lot of emails about people like, "Oh, I've read your work. I'm interested in working with you." And I do take time to read some of those emails. And the reason why I say some, because if it's too long, I'm like, "Oh," because I only have a small window of time. Like I have
Mhm.
many balls up in the air, if you will. I think maybe we'll get to this in this podcast. I think having a PhD in clinical psychology, it works for you if you have an entrepreneurial spirit. And we'll get to that hopefully. If not, then maybe that's a topic that you all could talk about in your podcast, is because you typically are not just doing one thing. So people who are in private practice aren't typically just doing private practice.
Mhm.
Academicians are typically not just doing research. Some have a small private practice, and so an entrepreneur, right? So because of that, kind of having the entrepreneur spirit, have a lot going on. What's really important for me is that you get right to the point. If you attach your CV, sometimes I do look at your CV based on what you said in your introduction and what you're interested in. But what's really important to me is that your research interests, that they fit with mine, and that you're not trying to fit was a square peg into a round hole. Like you're not trying to force a fit,
Yeah.
but that it
Mhm.
is a natural fit of like, okay, if my research is stress and coping, specifically looking at traumatic stress in adolescents and emergent adults and doing community interventions. And you're interested in trauma, but you're interested in interpersonal trauma. But I'm doing more of like traumatic stress, community violence, that type of work. Trauma, yes, they both fall under the umbrella of trauma, but my research and what I'm researching isn't under the guise of what you're researching. You're trying to make it fit because you're saying the umbrella of trauma.
Right.
Mhm.
And the reality is that where you're probably interested in going with that area of research is not what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Right. So making sure that there is a good fit um, between the research interests with you. And you don't have to be doing exactly what that professor is doing, but it should be enough overlap that you complement one another.
Mhm.
Yes. And I know I can speak to that in my own application process of seeking out. I was already told that applying to a doctoral program is basically applying to a professor, and
Mhm.
you would be taken under their wing, like you had mentioned before, and really closely working under them for the extent of the whole program. And
Yeah.
so with that in mind, I looked up the research that they were doing, looked up like what type of presentations, what type of things that of that nature that they were giving. And in the specifics, I had identified maybe 2 to 3 professors who were doing the type of research that I could see myself doing the type of work that I could see myself doing, whether it's like being a guest lecturer at a school and giving a talk on this. It was those specific ways in which they presented on the topics they were researching definitely piqued my interest. And that was kind of what was in the initial email that I had sent to them. And when it came time for the interview, I already knew the work that they did. I knew we were a good fit, and I could build upon that in the interview questions that they asked me at the interview. So even Brittany, can you speak to, we have the same, amazing Dr. Alukta as our advisor.
Yeah.
Brittany, can you speak a little bit to the fit of you two as well?
Yeah, everything she's doing, I'm interested in. So it's the perfect fit. She was offered to do a book review and suggested that I do it instead. And I'm like, I mean, it's still something that I want to do. It aligns directly with my interests as well. So I think I'm grateful that, but another thing about me is my interests are so broad. They are so broad that I don't think it takes a whole lot to actually fit. But Dr. Ukta being narrow and specific was perfect for me because I need that, being that my interest, I came in like, I can do this and I can do that. And I needed that specificity
Yeah.
to narrow me, because I think I was just going too far, like as far as my interest. But yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess the main takeaway from this is research. You want to make sure that aligns with, who you are applying to work with, that you have those particular interests or the same interests that they have. So I guess this goes into our next question as well, is what was your relationship like with your advisor?
That's a really great question. Because I had two advisors, basically, I had a different relationship with each. So both of them were really nice, very approachable, very supportive. So I had one professor that was like, I call her a great cheerleader. So she was going to be the cheerleader. You're great. You're awesome. Yeah, sure. Whatever you want. And so sometimes you need those people in your corner, because those are the people where you find a fellowship you want to apply to, or this application you want to submit. This is the person that you ask them last minute and they're gonna be like, sure. And they're gonna work because they want to see you win.
Yeah.
So I had the cheerleader. So Dr. Grant, she was great for that. And then Dr. Sanchez, she was great. She was very supportive, but she would also give me feedback that would help me grow. Right. And she did it in a very loving and very supportive way. And she was all team Jashawn, but she would definitely give me, like, one professor, I think she would give you all like the positive reinforcement and praise and stuff like that. But sometimes you need people to say, you could do better. It's great. This is awesome. You're great and awesome, but I don't see your great and awesomeness right now. What are you doing? And so Dr. Sanchez would be like, you're great, but here, read this. You can be better. And so I felt like I had that balance because of the two. And so I could always go and talk to them and ask them questions whenever I needed. One professor, I got both of them actually, like I could call them whenever I need them, with respect. I'm not gonna call them like late at night, but if I needed to call, if I need to talk, we need to go out to dinner, tea, they would make themselves available. And that's, for me and my lab and my students, that's really important, that my students feel comfortable with me so that they can come to me. Because the way that I introduce myself to my students of like, I am essentially your kind of your guide throughout this program. I'm here to help you. I'm also here to protect you when I need to, because people are going to be pulling for your time. And I need to protect my students. Like, nope, she's not busy. She can't do it. Right. But I also need to give you opportunities to be like, hey, do this book review. Hey, they need peer reviews for this conference, this conference for the abstracts. Why don't you sign up for it? Like, so making sure that you have opportunities, but then also kind of protecting you as well. So for me, and I tell my students, I'm like, look, we're going to be working together for the next 5 years. So the next 5, maybe even 6, depending upon what goes on in your life, you're going to be a part of my life. And so I like to protect my peace. So I need for my space to be protecting whoever coming into my space, that we have a certain type of relationship, working relationship. You don't have to be best friends. We're not looking for that. We're looking for a mentorship. So you're going to have to be able to talk with me, tell me what you need if you feel like you're not getting anything, and I need to be able to basically tell you whether I'm expecting more, or if you're, that what you're doing is not up to your potential, like you can do more. So kind of having that open relationship for constructive criticism.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think that's great that you talked about the balance between, and that's an interesting thing that you also had two different people who mentored and advised you, and they kind of had different styles. So it created a balance for you, which I feel like is so important. We work together on so many levels, especially Brittany and I and Dr. Auta. She leads us in this podcast. She helps us with professional needs as well as academic needs, as well as we're all working very closely with her on our dissertation, and she's our guidance for that. She's also my professor, and so just on so many levels we work together. So it's not only levels of trust, professionalism, communication that we have, but she gives us always, we can count on her for an honest opinion. So if something isn't up to par or good, she's not going to sugarcoat it. She's not going to, you know, let us put out like work that's not up to our ability. But it's, I think that key piece is that she knows our potential and our ability. And I think that's why she sought us out in the interview and took us on to her team, is because she saw the potential in us. She saw how she can be a great fit to help us grow and be our guide through this. Because honestly, these next 5 years, after we graduate, we're going to be put into the professional world. And that is going to be huge. But I know I feel confident under the wings of Dr. Alukta, and that she's preparing me to get to where I need to go, be the most thorough person I can, and put out the best work that but we also get along and have great times, like also talking to each other, but definitely make sure that academic rigor, professionalism rigor, and reaching our maximum potential is there. And that's why I'm so grateful to have her as our advisor.
Yeah. Oh,
that's awesome.
She's gonna enjoy hearing that.
She is. Well, yeah, just getting into mentoring style, because even within our program, I talk to my cohort members about my experiences and theirs, and we, you know, keep each other in the loop in terms of what happens in our research meetings, what our advisors are like, what works, what doesn't, things like that. And so the style in which your advisor or mentor advises you or mentors you is completely, it could be different, but it's really important. So Dr. Mance, what would you say your advising or mentoring style is?
That's a really good question. I think the perfect person or people to ask would be my mentees. I would definitely say for me, my students know that structure, I work well in structure. So I'm a person that has structure for my mentees. Okay. So for example, they have to have a strategic plan for their academic year. And we break it down by semester. So they have to tell me what their goals are for the semester. It's on paper, and they break it down by each week, what they're working on. So when we meet, I can look at their strategic plan and say, this is where you said that you were going to be. I don't have your documents. What's going on? And then what's going on is to hold you accountable for your research, to problem solve if there's some things that you're confused about or you're not sure of, that we could talk through some of your research. But then maybe there's just some personal things that are kind of serving as barriers for you to progressing through the program. And so that's the time for me to hold you accountable and be like, hey, what's going on? Let's process this. So definitely structure. So structure is one of my part of my mentorship style. Open communication. Okay. So you have to tell me what's going on in order for me to be able to, whether it's to teach you, to instruct you, to correct you, like you have to be honest and open for me to, within this process, for me to help you. Then I also look for students who take initiative. If you see that there is work that needs to be done, and for whatever reason, Dr. Mance isn't getting to it as quickly as a lab we would like, and even Dr. Mance would like to, that you fill in the gap because you have a skill set. That's why you're in the lab. You're in the lab because there are certain skill sets that you're bringing that I felt like my lab needed. So step up. Like, don't wait for me to give you instruction because this is grad school. You're not an undergrad anymore. And I'm constantly telling my students that this is grad school. And then sometimes I'm really holding them accountable. Let's say their last name is Jones. If I'm really holding them accountable, I said, well, Dr. Jones. So I call them, I'm calling them, speaking it into existence for them. I'm like, okay, you're Dr. Jones now. Is that acceptable? To kind of say, like, this is a level of professionalism. What's going on? And particularly this semester, I'm on partial leave because I just expanded my family. So we have a 3-month-old. And so I really needed for people in my lab, my students in my lab, to really fill in the gaps with this emerging wild Black study. And one student has really, kind of picked up that mantle and has really been moving it forward. And I just told her the other day, I was like, I want you to know I see you. I really appreciate you. I know what skill sets you have, and this is why, that you're in my lab. And so just kind of giving that feedback to know that you
Too, yeah.
acknowledge. So that's I guess my style is one that I'm very like, I will be your cheerleader. So I guess I kind of took both of them, because I will be the cheerleader, but then I also will tell you, we'll have, I call it, it's like, we need to come to Jesus meeting moments with my students. I'm like, okay, we need to have a real, like, we're going to have a moment. And so they know what that means. And so then we'll sit and I'll tell them, like, what you submitted to me, would you submit that to this person? So a person who I know that the entire department holds in high esteem. And if they were like, no, but then I'm like, well, why would you give this to me? It's kind of like holding them accountable, or either saying like, what's going on? Like, you're not producing, what's going on? So being able to have that open space for that.
Yes.
I actually have a follow-up question. Do you think that your mentees, all of them, require the same kind of style? Because I know you said you're both, like, you can be the cheerleader and then you can also, like, I guess, be sort of direct. Do you find that, some of your mentees need more style more than the other? Like, how does that look for your mentees?
Absolutely. Absolutely. But what they all get regardless is that structure piece.
Okay.
They all get the structure piece. So I have them sign a contract. So there's a contract, they read over it, and they have to sign a contract in the very beginning. And it's basically saying, this is what I expect from you, and this is what you can expect from me.
Okay.
And so those strategic plans, everybody has that. Now, how I approach you to hold you accountable is really based upon what I feel like you need. There's some people that just need a push. There's some people who need me to just be direct. And then there's some people who need a more gentler kind of approach. They still need to be held accountable, but they need a more gentler approach. And they need a little bit more flexibility. So even though we have this timeline, they need for me to be a little bit more flexible with their timeline. So for each student, I would say I kind of meet them where they are, to give them what they need. But there's certain things that everybody gets, and that's that structure.
Yeah. I think for our advisor, Dr. Aupta, I think the thing that everyone gets from her is, I think she's semi-structured, because she's flexible for sure, but I think we all get that strong communication piece. She's very responsive, and I think that is what I enjoy the most about having her as my advisor, because I know that myself, I need that communication. And there's not, like, I tell Brianna how I feel like I get on her nerves, but in a good way, because there's nothing that I'm doing professionally that Dr. Aupta doesn't know about. And she, like, a lot of things I'm running across her, and she's like, okay, so how does this relate to your goals?
Yes.
Remember what you want to do when you graduate. When I'm like applying to externships, she's like, okay, so what's your number one? Why is that your number one? Where are you planning to go for internship? How does this all align? So she's basically centering me with that communication for what my career will look like once I graduate. And that, I really appreciate her for that too. So
that's awesome. Yeah.
Well, I guess I think this is our last question, other than our audience member question that we have for you is there, I know people like to use the term mentor and advisor interchangeably, and I want to know, is there a difference between those terms for you? And if there is a difference, do you prefer one over the other, or do you prefer to be both for your students?
That's a really great question. So in our program, the clinical program, students can have a research advisor and a clinical advisor, and then sometimes the person is one and the same. If they're one and the same, that your clinical advisor is also your research advisor, that we tend to use the term mentor. If you work with someone who's your clinical advisor, but your research advisor is, some of our students team up with some psychologists or psychiatrists in hospital, the Howard Hospital. So maybe
Okay.
your research is with someone at Howard Hospital, but you're working with me as your clinical advisor. Um, the way that I interact with those students are a bit different than those who I deem as my mentees, my mentees.
Mhm.
So when I'm advising you, it's more of like we check in, we have meetings, and I'm making sure that you're meeting all the benchmarks and milestones for the program. And I'm answering any questions that you may have. So from an advising standpoint, I check in to be like, okay, we need to check in maybe about once a month to make sure that you're on track, and you can reach out to me. But I guess it's just a bit more formal and it's not as much communication. My mentees, they text me, they email with me. We have a standing meeting.
Mhm.
They meet with me individually bi-weekly, and then on those alternating weeks it's the team meeting. So they're seeing me every week.
Yeah.
So there, and then I'm also kind of checking in with them in regards to, let me see your essays for your externship applications. Let me read over, you're applying for this fellowship. Okay, let me read your essays. Okay, I'm going to write my letter, like I'm giving letters of recommendations for them. I'm giving them feedback on essays, feedback on just how they're moving through the program. Whereas the advisee, I'm making sure they're meeting their benchmarks, but there's not as much communication.
Okay.
Well, yeah, with the advisee.
Yeah. So which role do you prefer, or do you like enjoy having both like equally the same?
I enjoy the mentor-mentee relationship a bit more, because I feel like I am able to assist more in regards to their professional development, and really kind of help them with their goals and where they're trying, kind of where they're going. And I can intervene on their behalf when it needs to be done. The advisee role, I think there's a place for it. I mean, I think there is a place for it and it's important. But the advisee role, I feel like is very, at times, it doesn't always have to be this way, but at times it feels a bit more distant, or a bit more like we have to check off the box and then we keep on moving. But there have been a couple of advisees who wanted more one-on-one time. And so I will kind of invite them to a research meeting, because I know I have time after the research meeting so I can talk with them. So I will kind of like have, pre-COVID days, have tea or coffee with them or lunch with them to kind of talk to them and give them a little bit more insight. So I will make time for them, but like the priority is essentially the students who are my mentees, the ones that I brought into the program. But I enjoy the mentor role a bit more.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think you spoke to, like the formalness, and kind of I can agree to the sort of checking of the boxes, but also I think that goes into advisee advisor relationship as well, because if your style is to be communicative in a way that is also personable, then I think you have that space to build for, like, okay, we're also comfortable with each other to the point where, we can meet up for this, or we can text or call, and when you can do that during a certain time. So, and you spoke to before, the balance of a certain level of, we've got to get this done, you've got to do this, but also I'm going to be your cheerleader and this and that. So being different things for you and being flexible. So even for advisor listeners or program director listeners or other professor, if you're listening to this podcast, that can be something to keep in mind as well. So we're going to hop into the audience member question segment of the podcast. And so what we got this week was, how do you maintain professional relationships beyond the context you initially engaged them in? So for example, completing an externship, but wanting to keep in professional contact with the supervisor. That could potentially be that you want to be a mentor or advisor, how do you go about or navigate that if you're not in that professional setting anymore?
Oh, okay. This is a skill that I learned in my postdoc. I wish I
Okay.
would have had this skill in my during my doctoral program, but I learned this actually from a colleague, is that she would send emails to let's say supervisors that you had in your previous externship, just to say hello, just to
Mhm.
follow up, or let them know what you're doing now, or just to kind of just to check in. So whether it is around something new and novel that's happening in your life and you want to share the news with them, or whether it's around just a simple, like a holiday that you both mutually celebrate and acknowledge, then sending out an email to wish them well on that particular holiday or something. But this person actually made it kind of part of the, again, I'm all about structure and schedules. It worked for everybody, some people, but not for everybody. She would put in her calendar at like the 6-month mark of like check in with folks. So that way, or a
Wow.
3-month mark or a 6-month mark, she would check in with people. So even if that person only heard from you maybe twice that year, the fact is that they heard from you. So
Right.
like you need to circle back around and ask for a letter of recommendation. It's not like, oh, they have to go back and like, well, who is this person? They haven't heard from you in
Mhm.
like 3 years and they got to remember. But if you do it like every 6 months or every 3 months, then it kind of they can keep you in mind and they know what you're doing. So you can say, hey, I just got this externship. I just want to share with you because I learned a lot with you and this is where I am now. Just to kind of keep them updated. That's important.
Yes. I actually think that is great. And that's something that I tried to do with my mentors in undergraduate. So my senior year, fall semester, I took a semester abroad in Italy, but also I was a senior. So I was applying to my graduate school programs. So my mentors that were writing me my letters of recommendation and also who I came to for guidance and advice on the graduate school application process, before I had decided to apply to the certain programs that I had did, I always made it a point to throughout the summer, throughout when I was in Italy, I sent them pictures of me at the Eiffel Tower. I sent them all sorts of things like, hey, this is what I'm doing. When I chartered the Association of Black Psychologists, Temple University chapter, I let them know, like I always, from freshman to senior year, kept them in the loop of what I'm doing. Pre-COVID times, you can just drop into somebody's office and chat with them. Miss those days. But those sort of things, because then they're able to speak on your growth at that point, because if somebody just meets you, they can speak on that initial encounter or what you
Mhm.
were like when, say, they had you as a student in their class or whatever. But when you can speak to their growth professionally and personally and over the course of a certain amount of time, I think that's extremely important for recommenders and what they're probably going to say about you in your recommendation to these programs.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. I recently talked to someone that I'm considering having on my dissertation committee. I don't know where I'm at with that yet, but I'm considering some, like, I want to make sure I have this communication open. And she's like not my professor this semester, but I took on a job that called for me to use Stata, the analyzing software. And I contacted her. I was like, hey, I actually took on a position where I'm using Stata, because she taught us how to use Stata. I know a lot of other people use SPSS, and that's what I knew, but she taught us how to use that. So I took that moment to like, hey, thinking of you, you taught me Stata. I'm currently using Stata. Just wanted to let you know how things are going. So
Yeah.
I also think when you have like little reminders of people, you can also do a check-in like, hey, I did this and I know that you're interested in this or you have done this before, and I just wanted to check in. So that was one thing that I recently did.
And one more thing came to mind, which was again pre-COVID, but conferences, they tend to be a good way to kind of keep in contact with people,
Mhm.
just to see, who's presenting and make sure like you go to their presentation, or, like a happy hour networking, they call them happy networking hours or whatever. Make sure you go to some of those. So checking in with people at different conferences, or again, like you were saying, if something reminds you of someone, in that moment, if you can, now it's so easy, right? Because you can send an email from your phone. Just send a quick email just to say hello. If nothing, if that's the only thing you're doing is like, hey, I'm doing this, and I learned this when I was in your class, or when I was working with you on this externship, and now I'm utilizing this evidence-based practice. Wow, this is so cool. Like, even if it's just that one-liner, and just to kind of so people can remember you. That's important. And then when time allows, you can give them an update of like, hey, I'm doing this, I'm doing that, so they'll know what you're doing when it's time to write a letter of recommendation. Or sometimes I get things coming across my desk all the time with different like divisions in APA, or colleagues who are now directors at different, whether it's a hospital or community mental health center. And so if I know what a student is doing, and I'm like, oh, this would be a good fit for so-and-so, and I'll send it to them, but like, hey, check this out. And it may be someone who I worked with maybe 3 years ago, 4 years ago, but because they keep in contact and I know what they're doing and I know what they're interested in, I'm like, oh, this will be a good fit. Hey, you might be interested in this. They have an opening here. Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah. Well, I would like to follow up, as we are closing this episode of the podcast, with some updates in counseling psychology. So we want to send a congratulations to SCP member Dr. Candice Hargens on her election to the APA Board of Directors. It's great, to have representation from counseling psychology. I know you're clinical psych, Dr. Mance. We're a counseling psych student. But it's great to have representation, and she is also a fellow dog. So she also went to my alma mater. We're both attended the University of Georgia. So congratulations, Dr. Candice Hargens.
awesome.
Yes, shout out to Dr. Candice Hargens on that. That is an amazing achievement. Congratulations to you. And so I just want to close off this episode saying thank you to all the listeners for tuning in, and a special thank you to Dr. Mance for being a guest on today's episode. You've been a wealth of knowledge to us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes. And on our next episode, listeners, you all can look forward to us talking about how to make your application stand out, and a big one, funding. I know a lot of people are interested in talking about that, especially as it relates to graduate programs. So just remember to follow us on social media. All our social media is the same: Facebook, Instagram, at Psych Podcast. It should be coming across the screen. And our email is psychpodcast@gmail.com if you all have any comments or questions and might not want to message us on Facebook or Instagram. We have an email for that as well. So be sure to catch us on streaming platforms as well: Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. And that closes our show. Again, thank you, Dr. Mann, so much for taking the time out, that you have a newborn, to chat with us and give us this great information about mentorship and timelines. So thank you again.
Welcome. Thank you. Bye.